Everything's twisting!
That's because you're moving parallel to the space distortion. It's the shortest way back home.
Hello, this is Screen Rant. I'm interviewing the team behind Rick and Morty, the anime. This is such a wild project. Having seen the first episode, I expected it to be suitably wild. It is somehow even wilder, so I am very excited to speak to all of you about this. So, obviously the anime series has grown out of the shorts. Can you talk a bit about the genesis of the shorts? I think when people think of Western properties to adapt to anime, Rick and Morty wasn't necessarily the first to come to mind, so I'm very curious, how was that even pitched to the higher-ups?
So the Rick and Morty shorts came about really, obviously at Adult Swim. In my previous job at Adult Swim, where I ran Adult Swim on air, part of what we like to do was reinterpret our shows for little short, what we call bumps or IDs, where we would throw to mostly independent artists, but people from all over the world, and let them interpret things because we just thought it was interesting. And Rick and Morty, which was so popular globally, it was very easy for us to find artists who were like, I would love to do a Rick and Morty thing. So really how anime came about is we just sort of were like, why don't we try and see what Rick and Morty as anime would be like? Because there are some clear anime influences in the show itself. And so we decided to go ahead and explore that, and I was able to convince my bosses to greenlight a few of them, among which was Rick and Morty versus Genocider, which was the first one Sano directed and wrote, and that was a huge success for us. It was 15 million views on YouTube. It was big. So it really got the network's attention, and that's when the idea came up of do you think Sano would want to do more of these? And I said, well, I can ask. So here we are.
So Rick and Morty is obviously a monumental property. It's absolutely huge in the States, but I think what a lot of viewers might not be as aware of is how Rick and Morty is viewed in Japan, especially with this being an anime. I'm kind of curious about the series' popularity in Japan. How big is Rick and Morty?
Probably not at the scale it is in the West, especially. It's always the case where Jason has these brilliant ideas and he just drops it on me. He's like, "Hey, Rick and Morty anime." I'm like, "Go look," and I'm like, "Huh?" So, but it's one of those things. A lot of these projects have a life of their own. It just so happened the director I just worked with was a huge fan of Rick and Morty. He just went through every single episode, and he was. And it's just one of those things. Sometimes when I try to produce an anime based on a Western IP, like you're just suggesting that it's not as big in Japan, so it's very hard to find not just the fans but the creators who are willing to take on with passion. But really, it's like each project really has a fate of its own. And when he first suggested it, I didn't realize, because we were working together at the time on another title, but he was a huge fan. But who better than this guy, because he's such a veteran director of the, in anime industry, and he's just wonderful. So so it's just kind of that's how we kind of ended up with this creative crew.
So watching the first episode, you can definitely tell it was made by a fan. One thing that really struck me about it is it's a very ambitious first episode. I think you hear the word Rick and Morty anime, and you get a kind of an idea. And this is, take all those ideas, throw them out. This is completely its own thing. Was there ever any desire to tell the story in a more conventional way, or is the more kind of erratic structure, and I mean that complimentarily, was that always part of the project's bones as on a thematic level?
Of course, he's gonna need to answer that.
Yes.
But I'll just kind of preface it by saying, sometimes I ask him the question, so is this story meant to be like this? And he's like, no. And he explains it to me, and I still don't understand, so, but let him have it.
Yes.
じゃあどうぞ。この
今の
はい一話の話。
そうですね、元の本家のリック&モーティ、アメリカ版のリック&モーティがそもそもいろんな要素ガシャッとなっ ってるのが面白いと思ったんですよ。だからそのテイストは日本版にも入れようと思って、でなおかつ今回っていうか、SF っぽいテーマを扱う上で、いや今回ちょっと本家の、リック&モーティでは扱ってない時間に関してちょっとテーマとして入れてみたんですよね。それもあって、時間とあと本家の中にある時空、次元移動とか次元間のいろんな次元がある、なんて言うんでしたっけ、マルチバースの要素と時間とを組み合わせて、それを表現したかったんで、1話はその雰囲気を出すためにあえてちょっと時間をいじっていろんな要素を入れて、いろんな世界の例えばモーティがいるとか、そういう作りにして、1話はその雰囲気をまず出したいと思って作りました。
So, as you know, he writes, directs, storyboards, animates. So he's like a one-man machine. Even he had help, of course. But when he was looking at, I mean, to your question about the first episode, I mean, the desire was to try and obviously to convey something obviously familiar in terms of a universe and the set of characters that he needs to portray for the fans of Rick and Morty, of course. But it has such a template where it can, basically Rick and Morty can take on anything. But the one thing he thought maybe he could bring, like there's one new thing that he could bring to the table was messing with time. So he wanted to basically, the element of time, but also, I mean, it's, he wanted to be careful that he didn't want to overdo this multiverse, which is kind of hip right now, but that multi-dimensional multiverse story where each universe is basically populated by different Mortys. But then he also wanted to introduce the element of time so that it really gets wild. So the first episode was his attempt to just ease people in, but to set up this complicated, really wild story that's going to happen, from episode 1 on. And so that's how he saw episode 1. Start out conventional, but then just set something up that'll just really boggle the viewer's mind. Yeah.
Right. It did a very good job of keeping not readers, sorry.
You were boggled.
Boggled.
Yeah, of keeping viewers like engaged and kind of like, oh, what's this? So I caught the girl who leapt through time reference in the first episode's title. Are little Easter eggs and references to Japanese pop culture sprinkled throughout the series, or did you want to keep that to kind of a minimum to keep it its own thing?
そうですね。時をかける少女は映画でもアニメーションでもあるし、実写の映画でもあるんですけど、原作が小説なんですよ。筒井康隆って人の。で、僕は筒井康隆が子供の頃から大好きだったんで、よく読んでたんで、無意識の中でそういう要素は出てたかもしれないですね。
So The Girl Who Leaped Through Time was actually before it was that anime movie that you saw.
Yeah.
It's actually a famous novel, and then and so it was turned into live action films and other forms of I think entertainment in Japan. But he loved the book when he was young. So I think a lot of these themes that you see is like something that he was influenced by, probably it was quite unconscious for him actually. This is what he's saying, and also because he's been in anime for so long that it wasn't his intention to trot out certain tropes, but it just comes out naturally. Yeah,
Definitely. I noticed the cast for the anime series, for the English dub, is different than the cast for the main Rick and Morty anime. Can you talk a little bit about why that change was made? Was that a creative choice meant to match up more with what fans expect from an anime, or was there another reason?
There were actually a bunch of reasons for that. Initially what we thought was, because when we released the shorts, we did not dub them in English. And the initial thinking from us was, well, let's just release it the way we did the shorts. But then the more we talked to our international partners and stuff, they were like, look, English would really help this in some other territories around the world. And we didn't want to limit the ability of the show to reach as many people as possible. The reason we didn't use the original cast is because the original cast is already busy working on the flagship show, and we frankly wanted to really lean into the idea that this is not the same Rick and Morty, just drawn differently. This is a different Rick and Morty. This is a Rick and Morty that Sano has personally put his own spin on. And so to highlight the fact that this is you should consider this an alternate Rick and Morty, we thought it made sense to hire, first of all, a cast of dub actors who understand the process of dubbing Japanese performances into English, which is in and of itself, as you know, very tricky, but also to cast just people who have never played these roles before, because we want to keep this separate in every way from the flagship show so that people really understand this is its own thing. You can love it, you can compare it to the other show if you want to, but it's just supposed to be Sano's vision of Rick and Morty, and we thought that using our own choices for those roles helps to highlight that.
Right. What you said about keeping this as Sano's vision makes a lot of sense to me. I'm kind of curious, though, about when a lot of properties are adapted into anime, there'll be a lot of studio demands like, oh, this character wouldn't necessarily do this. So was there any effort put into making sure that things like that were consistent, or was it completely hands off, Sano, take the wheel?
It was a mix of both. The Rick and Morty show unit was consulted on all the overall storylines. They very much loved the anime shorts, and they were way on board with the idea of this show. They thought it was great. They basically just asked us to stay away from a few things that they knew they were going to deal with in the main show, because they just didn't want people getting confused, which we thought made total sense. And then after that, yeah, they were pretty much hands off. Once we were clear story lanes wise, they knew they liked Sano and his work and what he was doing, and they trusted us to just do it. And once we told them, look, these versions of these characters are going to be very similar to what you saw in Sano's shorts. They're a little different than your Rick and Morty's, but we're not making them totally different characters. They were like, great. And from there, it was just Sano and his vision.
Speaking of the characters, one of the things that struck me most about the first episode were the two new original characters who added a lot of mystery, and I'm very intrigued to see where their storyline goes. To me, they did stand out a little bit just because they are so different. They do feel more like traditional anime characters, whereas the traditional Rick and Morty cast felt kind of like hybrid, Rick and Morty, but also anime. So was there a conscious effort to make their dialogue, their actions and everything feel different, feel distinct to make them stand out, or was that kind of like a happy accident?
日本のアニメ的っていう風にはあえて意識せずに作ってるんですけど、僕自身が日本でずっとアニメを作ってきたので、もう作ってるうちに日本のアニメっぽくはなると思うんですよ。なので今回、新しいキャラクターとしてエルっていう女の子が登場するんですけど、彼女はそうですよね、あえて日本のアニメっぽくしたわけじゃないんですけど、そうなってるかもしれないですね。ただ意識して日本のアニメっぽくしようとはしてないです。
So normally it's just, I think it sort of connects with the last question, but he doesn't necessarily, he didn't approach this to make this into an anime. So when creating new characters, it wasn't his intent to kind of married a trope into this. So, but so the thought kind of came into when creating these characters was really how does this character fit in the narrative and then the world of Rick and Morty, his Rick and Morty. But he does want to stay faithful to the template, meaning the strong template that was been provided by the original series, because there's a lot of respect that goes in there. So I think it's a happy accident in a way that the way it happened, as you described, but he now looking back. Oh, just because I worked in anime for decades, it does seep out.
It's just natural, right? Yeah. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask about the potential for season 2. A lot of anime, there's a lot of very good anime and a lot of great anime on Adult Swim that are 12 episode, one and done, you're getting a complete story. If the fan response to this is as good as I'm sure it will be, is there a possibility for a season 2, or are you really just planning this to be a limited?
We didn't we didn't make this with the idea that like, oh, now we can keep making a different kind of Rick and Morty forever, right? But if the response is big enough and people really like it, it's certainly, we all had a great time on the project and Adult Swim loves it. So I think anything is possible. It just sort of, it will, like anything these days, it depends on how well this season does. So we'd kind of be happy if this is it because we're really happy with what we did, but we'd be real happy to do more, and that'll be up to the fans and Adult Swim.
I was going to say we were greenlighted for season 10, but
No.
that's the official version.
10 seasons in a movie, right?
Yeah.
All right, I think that's all the time I had. Like I said, genuinely really an honor to talk to all of you. This was such an ambitious project in a way that I didn't expect, but in the best way possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
They're already on top of you! I'm headed your way now! Run for it, Rick! Run! I've got nothing to do with your little army. Just leave me the hell out of it.